In a quiet, dusty town on the outskirts of Arizona, lived a young widow named Aisha Monroe. With a beauty that seemed to glow under the moonlight, she was the kind of woman whose presence made people turn their heads, men and women alike. Her long chestnut hair, tall frame, and kind but sorrowful eyes were unforgettable. She had only been married for a few months to a kind, hard-working man named Kyle Monroe, a local date farm worker. But tragedy struck too soon. On a scorching summer afternoon, while Kyle was tending to the tall desert palms, a dried branch snapped beneath his boot. He fell from the top of the tree, landing hard on the cracked, unforgiving sand below. By the time the townsfolk reached him, the sun had begun to set, casting a blood-orange hue over his still body. He was gone. Aisha, who had been baking flatbread in their adobe home, froze when she heard the neighbors' screams. Her heart pounded as she sprinted toward the palm groves. But by the time she arrived, her husband's soul had already left this world. In a matter of minutes she had become a widow, alone with her elderly mother, Halima, in a warm clay house that barely kept the desert heat out. Days passed slowly. To survive, Aisha began doing chores for the wealthier families in town. She washed laundry, swept patios, and baked traditional bread for a few dollars here and there. Then, one day, she was struck by a terrible illness. Her body burned with fever, her skin flushed red, and she shook violently with chills. She couldn't sleep at night, nor move much during the day. Halima, terrified for her daughter, took her to see the town's elderly healer, Mr. Abraham Wise, a man known for his knowledge of herbs and desert remedies. After a long examination, he looked gravely at Halima and said, "This isn't just a fever. She needs urgent medical injections. Without them, her condition might worsen drastically." Halima, holding her hands together in despair, whispered, "But how, sir? The nearest hospital is hours away. We have no money, no transport." Mr. Wise was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's someone who can help. Dr. Nathan Sharp has the equipment and medication in his house. He's the only one in town who can give her the injections." At the mention of his name, a chill ran down Aisha's spine. Dr. Nathan Sharp, mid-40s, charming, sharp-tongued, with an unsettling stare, had a reputation. Not for kindness, but for something far murkier. Though he provided minor medical services like wound care and injections, many women in town whispered uneasily about his behavior. One woman, Selma Davis, once told Aisha, "Nathan talks sweet, moves like a snake. You never know when he's going to strike." That sentence echoed in Aisha's mind as soon as she heard his name. She turned to Mr. Wise, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't you do it instead? Please?" "I'm sorry, child," he said. "I've never been trained to give injections. Herbs won't help this time. You must go to Nathan's house, soon." Halima squeezed Aisha's trembling hands. "You have no choice, sweetheart. We have to trust this man, for your life." "I don't know, Mama," Aisha said, her voice weak. "My heart feels uneasy." That night Aisha couldn't sleep. Her fever was raging, her heart pounding with dread. The next morning she dragged herself out of bed. Halima, worried, told her, "Come back quickly, my child." Aisha gave a faint smile. "Don't worry. I'll be back soon." She stepped outside into the dusty, silent street. As she neared Nathan's home, her steps slowed. Her hand hovered over the door but hesitated. Something deep inside her warned her not to knock. But then she remembered Mr. Wise's words, and her mother's fear. She took a deep breath and knocked. Footsteps echoed inside. The door creaked open. Dr. Nathan stood there in a plain shirt and slacks, a strangely warm smile on his face. His eyes lingered on her face, reading her silently. "Welcome, Aisha," he said softly. "Come in. I've been expecting you." Aisha's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she stepped into Nathan's home. The air inside smelled of rubbing alcohol and something else, something thick and bitter. The lights were dim, the curtains drawn tight. Nathan gestured toward a small room to the left. "That's my treatment room," he said. "We'll take care of you in there. I just need the injection," Aisha muttered, her voice hoarse with fever. "Of course," he replied, his smile never fading. "Let's make you feel better." The treatment room was cramped, with cracked adobe walls and a wooden table pushed against the corner. On the table sat vials, a tray of syringes, and a small lamp casting a yellowish glow. Aisha hesitated at the doorway, her body tense. She stood close to the door, as if preparing to bolt at the slightest sign. Nathan noticed her hesitation and chuckled lightly. "Relax. There's no one else here except for a relative sleeping in the next room. You're safe." Aisha said nothing. As Nathan moved toward the table to prepare the injection, he asked over his shoulder, "You've been through a lot, haven't you? So young, and already a widow." Aisha's face stiffened. "Just give me the shot. Please." He turned, syringe in hand, and gave her a long look, one that made her skin crawl. Then his smile returned. "Don't be nervous. I'd just like to make sure my patients feel comfortable." She pressed her back against the wall. "My mother's waiting for me. Please hurry." Nathan approached slowly. "Take a deep breath," he said softly. "It'll be over quickly." Aisha obeyed, barely able to breathe through the pounding in her chest. Nathan turned toward the shelves as if reaching for something else, and then stepped behind a thick beige curtain that separated the treatment room from the rest of the house. "Wait here," he said. "Just a second." What happened behind that curtain, only two people would ever truly know. Moments later, a scream tore through the house. It was raw, primal, filled with panic and pain. Aisha burst through the curtain, her headscarf slipping from her shoulder, her eyes wild with tears. Two elderly women in the courtyard, waiting to collect herbal medicines, looked up in shock as she fled from the door. Her face was flushed, her breath ragged, and she didn't say a word. She just ran. Down the dirt paths, past the silent houses, Aisha ran until she reached home. Halima, preparing breakfast, turned at the sound of her daughter's stumbling footsteps. "What's wrong, my baby?" she cried, rushing to her. But Aisha tore herself free and locked herself in her small room. Halima knocked over and over, her voice choked with fear. "Aisha, open the door! What happened? Did he hurt you? Talk to me." But Aisha said nothing. She sat on the edge of her bed, trembling. Her lips pressed shut, her hands clasped tight. Words swelled in her chest but never came out. Something inside her had shattered, and now, all she could do was cry silently into the pillow, the echo of that room, that man, still haunting her. Outside, the whispers began. The women who had seen Aisha flee Nathan's house began to talk. The whispers spread like wildfire across the town. Every home buzzed with rumors, every corner echoed with speculation. But Aisha remained silent. And then, weeks later, her body began to change. Her belly slowly began to swell. At first, Aisha wore looser clothes, trying to hide the growing swell of her belly. She barely left the house, afraid of the gazes, the whispers, the judgment. But small towns see everything. One afternoon, Aunt Martha, an elderly neighbor with sharp eyes, noticed the change. Her expression hardened with quiet shock. "Aisha," she said cautiously to Halima, "is your daughter pregnant?" Halima stood frozen. Her hands trembled, but she said nothing. Her silence was enough. Within days, the entire town was buzzing with scandal. Some men gathered at the mosque, muttering angrily. "This is a disgrace," one of them said. "If Nathan Sharp is responsible, he must be held accountable. We won't let this bring shame on all of us." Soon, a group of young men marched to Nathan's house. They hurled stones at the walls and shouted his name into the wind. "Nathan, you snake!" one man screamed, his voice shaking with rage. "What did you do to her?" But the house remained silent. Nathan did not come out. The next morning, a few of the town's older women, including Aunt Martha, went to see Halima. Their faces were filled with pity and concern. "You're her mother," Martha said gently. "Something must be done. He must answer." Halima lowered her gaze. She hasn't said a word. Not since that day. I don't know what happened. Inside her room, Aisha heard everything. The voices outside her door, the murmurs through the walls. She watched her body grow, the curve of her stomach undeniable now. Each glance at the cracked mirror brought tears to her eyes. She would sit alone for hours, hands on her belly, wondering what her future would be. Her silence became a barrier no one could break. Not even Halima. Some people said Nathan must be the father and should take responsibility. Others weren't so sure. How do we know? Some asked. She never accused him. Maybe she's hiding something. To protect Aisha's reputation and the unborn child, the elders of the town came to a difficult decision. Nathan must marry her. It was the only way to preserve her dignity and prevent disgrace. When they approached Nathan with the demand, he did not protest. I will do whatever the elders decide, he said calmly. But his eyes, as always, held something unreadable. Something dark. When Halima told Aisha, her daughter's face went pale. No, she whispered. Mama, I can't marry him. I'd rather die. Halima held her trembling hands. Be patient, my daughter. God will show a way. A day later, when the town elders returned to Nathan's home to finalize the marriage, they found the house empty. Nathan Sharp had disappeared. Nathan's sudden disappearance sent a fresh wave of confusion and anger through the town. The elders stood outside his quiet, dusty house, knocking and calling, but no one answered. One of the younger men, fists clenched, shouted, "He ran away! That coward ran from his own crime!" Inside Halima's home, Aisha's condition was weakening by the day. Her face had grown pale, her frame thinner, even as her belly continued to swell. Nights were sleepless. Days passed in silence. Then one evening, there was a knock on the door. It was Abdul, Kyle's younger brother. Abdul had always reminded Halima of her late son-in-law, same brown eyes, same gentle voice. After Kyle's death, Abdul had visited often to check on Aisha and her mother. But now, as he stood in the doorway with his mother behind him, his face was solemn. "Miss Halima," he said softly, "I've come to ask for Aisha's hand." Halima's eyes widened in disbelief. "I know what people are saying. I know the child in her belly may not be mine. But I don't care," Abdul continued, his voice steady. "She was once my brother's wife. I can't let her carry this shame alone. I want to protect her. I want to give her and the baby a home." Tears filled Halima's eyes. She reached out and placed her hand over Abdul's. "You're a good man. I'll speak to her." Inside her room, Aisha sat curled on her bed. Halima told her everything. At first, Aisha didn't respond. Her eyes stared blankly at the floor. But then, slowly, she remembered Abdul's kindness. His honesty. His resemblance to Kyle. She looked up and whispered, "If he's doing this for me, not for pity, but from his heart, then I accept." A week later, in the presence of a few relatives and neighbors, a small, quiet wedding was held. There were no celebrations, no feasts, no music. Just vows and tearful prayers. For the first time in months, Aisha smiled. But her joy didn't last long. Only a few days after the wedding, her body was gripped by pain. The fever returned, fiercer than before. She collapsed one morning, her cries piercing through the walls of the house. Halima and Abdul rushed her to the old healer, Mr. Wise, whose face turned grim upon seeing her. "She needs to go to a real hospital," he said. "This is beyond me. It's serious." But before they could make arrangements, Aisha screamed out in agony and collapsed again. Her body shuddered, and then came the heartbreak. She had lost the child. The miscarriage shattered Aisha. As she lay on the thin mattress in her dimly lit room, her arms curled around her stomach, a hollow silence settled over the house. The child she hadn't asked for, but had silently grown to accept, was gone. Tears streamed down her face, but not a word left her lips. Halima sat beside her, stroking her damp hair, whispering prayers and words of comfort. Abdul stood at the door, his hands clenched, helpless against the pain he couldn't ease. The days that followed were heavy. The town slowly moved on, but Aisha's house remained somber. She didn't speak much, only nodding or shaking her head. Abdul, now her husband, didn't push her. Instead, he brought her water, sat with her in silence, and lit candles each night near the window. The soft, flickering light was his quiet promise to stay. Then, one evening, months later, something unexpected happened. Nathan Sharp returned. He walked into town as if nothing had happened. His beard was overgrown, his clothes worn, but his confident stride remained. He even dared to step into the local general store. "Get out!" snapped Mr. Salem, the store owner. "There's nothing for you here." Nathan didn't argue. He simply gave a polite nod and stepped back into the street. But the townspeople weren't done with him. That night, as news of his return spread, angry voices rose again. Some wanted justice, others revenge. But Nathan didn't hide. He returned to his old house, swept the porch, lit his lanterns, and sat on the steps as if waiting for something. That something came hours later. As midnight approached, smoke began to rise from the edge of town. Nathan's house was on fire. The flames shot up into the sky, lighting the night in a blaze of orange and red. Villagers gathered, watching from a distance. No one moved to help. No one called out. It was as if the fire itself was delivering justice. Some swore they saw Nathan banging on the window, but no one opened the door. No one went near. They stood still, as the building collapsed in a shower of sparks and heat. By morning, all that was left was ash. In the days that followed, no one spoke Nathan's name aloud. No one mourned him. He had disappeared from the town's story, like a shadow swallowed by the flame. As for Aisha, the burden on her chest began to lighten. She stood by the window one morning, looking out over the quiet street, her hands resting where her belly once swelled. And for the first time in a long while, she whispered a prayer of peace. Spring slowly crept into the small desert town, bringing with it a gentle wind that stirred the orange blossoms and warmed the sun-baked clay walls of the houses. Aisha stood in her small garden, barefoot on the cool earth, her dress fluttering around her legs. Though her body had grown thin, her eyes carried a quiet strength now, no longer haunted, but clear, like still water after a storm. Months had passed since the fire. Nathan Sharp's name faded from town gossip. His house, now a blackened shell, was left untouched, a grim reminder that evil, once revealed, had no place to hide. Some said the fire was divine punishment, others whispered about vengeance. But Aisha never spoke of him again. Instead, she focused on rebuilding. With Abdul by her side, she found herself beginning to smile again, not forced or polite, but real. He never asked questions about that day, never tried to pry open wounds she wasn't ready to share. He simply stayed. Steady. Patient. And slowly, Aisha began to trust again. She returned to baking bread for neighbors, her hands working dough with new purpose. The scent of warm flatbread would drift from their little home, drawing children and elders alike. Her quiet presence became a comfort to many, not just for the food, but for her courage. One day, while hanging laundry under the morning sun, Aisha noticed a group of young girls watching her. Their eyes wide, curious, a little shy. "You're not scared anymore?" one of them asked softly. Aisha looked at her, then smiled. "Fear comes. But it doesn't stay, if you stand long enough in the light." That evening, Halima sat by the window, combing Aisha's hair just like she had in childhood. "Your face," she said, "looks different now. Like someone who knows the secrets of the sky." Aisha closed her eyes and whispered, "I know God sees. That's enough." And it was. She had walked through fire, of shame, of grief, of judgment, and come out not just alive, but whole. Her scars did not define her. Her silence was not weakness. It had been the quiet of survival, of deep strength buried beneath fear. As the sun set over the horizon, casting golden light across the red sands, Aisha stood on the porch of her modest home with Abdul by her side. The wind blew gently through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, she felt no weight on her chest. She had survived the unthinkable. She had been broken and rebuilt. And now, she was free.